Hey guys, and welcome back to another video. So today I will be drawing on my phone, and it's been kind of a while, so sorry if I'll be a little bit rusty. I currently have the Samsung S20 FE, and I'll be using a stylus as well, as I already knew that I wanted to use one instead of my finger. So I kind of bought this 3-pack, and basically this stylus has two ends, one with this kind of plastic disc at one side, and the other one has this typical kind of like squishy end that you see a lot of people use just for using on these kinds of devices. I am mostly going to be using the squishy side anyways, so let's get started. I am going to be using the Clip Studio Paint app on the Android, and I've done a little bit of testing and doodling here and there just to kind of test out some few features and just to kind of get used to the overall app. So in Clip Studio Paint for mobile, they actually have a studio mode, which is an interface that is very similar to the desktop version. Same tools and settings all available to you in this mode, but they also have a simple mode. Simple mode is newly added to the updated smartphone version. The interface is much more simple and very easy to navigate. So I'm going to switch over to the simple mode so I can show you some of the features and some of the settings. You have access to layers, brushes, swapping between tools, transformation tools, and colors as well. So basically, the default brushes, or if you use the previous interface, which is the studio mode, you can import brushes from there too, or you can browse for more brushes and download them from their asset library. So let me show you how simple it is to download from there. So basically, you can log in and then find your desired brushes from the plethora of brushes that they have on their kind of like library or store, and then you can click download and it will automatically switch back to the app and it will start to download right at the very top. Once it's downloaded, you can start to use it right away, and you can see I used this kind of neon pen brush to give it a little bit of a test, and I thought it was pretty cool. So let's kind of get started with the drawing session for today. I will be kind of like in the middle downloading some new brushes as well as we get into the coloring phase. Just to kind of preface this video a little bit, phones tend to not have a high pressure sensitivity or the capability to the same degree as, let's say, a tablet does. So I'm going to try to find brushes that suit what I like for different steps in my process, and I'm going to be showing you guys a few that I've downloaded, and I'll make sure to include them in the description if you guys are interested in which brushes that I use for certain particular steps. So to kind of keep things a little bit consistent, I am going to be drawing my OC Maseki once again, but I want to go a bit more summery, so I'm going to kind of stick to that theme a little bit. I do forget to change the background color later, so it probably doesn't give off that vibe. But to start off, I started with a rough sketch of the body and the head and made a new layer after I dimmed the sketch down so that we can make a cleaner sketch on top. So usually during this kind of phase of sketching, this is kind of what I considered my actual sketch portion. So the rough sketch I used to kind of like block in the shape of the body and everything just for placement, or if you care about composition, it's a good way to kind of establish that early on. But then I like to do a cleaner sketch on top, because usually in my process, I like to use my sketch as the kind of like line work before I color, because I usually don't do line work. But for today, we are going to be doing some line art today. So once we get to that step, I'll explain the brushes and things that I recommend. But for today's brush that I'm using for the sketching portion, I am using the Froggy pencil. It has that little bit of texture. I feel like it makes marks quite easily, and I feel like doing two sketches on two different layers just kind of make everything a little bit more clean to look at and not as confusing with all the lines everywhere. But now with the sketch done, I am lowering this one's opacity. I also hid the other sketch so that won't get in the way. And then for the line work, I won't be able to pronounce it, but I'll make sure to either put it on screen or to put in the description so you guys can check it out. And this brush kind of automatically already has like a taper at the very end, or kind of like, you know, so you can kind of get that line width variation. But I'm going to kind of take my time and do the line work a little bit more meticulously compared to how I've done it before in the past. But I'm following the same procedure where I basically end up using kind of like the brush as is, and then I will do the line weight variation and make sure things taper and get thinner and thicker either by erasing or adding more via the pencil. So yeah, I really like this one. This one's meant for inking, I'm pretty sure, so it's kind of nice. It does have a texture and a little bit of grit to it, so it kind of fits a little bit more with what I was using earlier, which was the Froggy pencil. But I'm kind of leaving the line work a little bit on the thinner side compared to how I usually work, so that we can kind of give this kind of illustration a little bit more of a clean look rather than having too punchy and bold of lines. Earlier, you would have saw me that I decided to copy and paste the eye over, and luckily in the simple mode you do still have access to the transform tools and like selection tools, so it's still easy for you to work with everything available on the simple mode. I think the only difference that I really found that might cause a little bit of an issue for people if you like to adjust your brush as you work is that in studio mode versus simple mode, I believe you only really get access to the opacity and the size, and you can reset your brush to default when you click on the brush to change the settings. But in studio mode, you do get the whole entire settings menu that you usually get on the desktop mode. So if you want to change like the setting of like you want to set your pen to jitter or anything like that, or like I forget what the other ones are, so you can have it taper, you can have stabilization, like all that jazz. You can definitely change, you can change the shape of the brush and all that. If you want to change your brush settings in detail, I would suggest that you change the desired settings in studio mode and then importing the brush to simple mode, and then you can continue to draw with your updated settings. I am speeding up the line work process because I wanted to show how tedious it was and I didn't want to cut out too much of it. But now we have all the line work done. I'm going to go ahead and slide the layers over, and you can see we have access to folders now. So now that I have access to folders, I'm basically putting all my line art layers inside that folder, and then I'll make a separate folder for the colors. So usually I like to do this because I like to set my folder to kind of like a reference layer so we don't have to continuously go to it to select. But because I don't have that option in the simple mode, you do have access to it in the studio mode, but I don't think it's like something that's necessary. I usually manually color anyways, so it's not too big of a deal. And this kind of just made it easier so I don't miss kind of like little spots in places where maybe the bucket tool didn't fill all the way. So I'm basically gonna color in all my flats first, which I usually don't do, but I'm doing it just to make today easier. And then once I have all my flats, we can get into actual shading and all the coloring and all that. So I didn't really talk about it too much during the line work process or during the coloring process, which we're doing now. But the fact that on the bottom left-hand corner, which is kind of cut off right now, apologies about that, but there is a tool that allows you to swap between tools very quickly. It is defaulted to having your brush tool or whatever your main tool is, and then your eraser tool. So it makes it a lot easier for me to kind of clean up things as we go and kind of switch back and forth, similar to if you had like a like a keyboard shortcut as well. So it just makes it a lot easier because it is very accessible for you to use. So I do like the fact that that's kind of part of the bottom bar. So as I was kind of coloring, you can see I've been using mostly kind of like an airbrush, and I didn't really like how it was looking with the airbrush. So I went ahead and went back into the Clip Studio Assets library to find a different set of brushes that work a little bit better. And I found one that had some nice kind of like airbrush mediums, some softer ones, and it kind of labeled itself as like pen fade. So I really liked these brushes for coloring on the phone. So I'll make sure to link them down in the description if you guys are interested in using it, especially if you want to use them in Clip Studio Paint. I highly recommend them. So if you use Clip Studio Paint on your phone before and you've been using mostly the studio mode, now with the simple mode available, I highly recommend giving it a go. I think it's just a little bit less daunting and a little bit less cluttered compared to the studio mode. Also, if you're new to using Clip Studio Paint, the studio mode I find a little bit more harder for people to recognize certain icons if you're not familiar with the previous interface, let's say on the desktop version, unless you end up doing a lot of experimenting and playing around, which I always recommend if you're using a new program. But for the simple interface, I think things are pretty straightforward with the settings on the bottom. So you kind of have your colors, your layers, and then you have your two tools, and then you have your also switching between your two tools right at the bottom. So I think it's very straightforward. You also have your undo and your redo at the very top. You can import images or assets or materials at the top with that little picture button, and then the 3 triple dots allows you to go in through your settings. So that's like your preferences, your canvas settings. You can look at the time lapse as well, and just I think it's just a little bit more clean, which I really like. And as it says, it is the simple version, so I feel like it just feels a lot less cluttered everywhere because most of the stuff is centered on the bottom. And I do like the fact that for the layers, you do have a little bit more options. If you hold the layer, you can get more options to come out, or if you slide the layers to the side, you can also get the folders available, which I think helps quite a bit. So back to the drawing for a little bit. I didn't talk about it too much. I ended up adding a little bit of color back into Masaki's hair with a little bit of teal, and I made the kind of any hair around the center of his face a lot softer. And I decided to change the line work also because I wanted it to appear softer and match the skin and the hair a little bit more cleanly, if that makes sense. So yeah, we moved on to working on the clothing, and I feel like with the combination of the 2 brushes from their set, which is like the airbrush and kind of like like the softer brush, I believe, I was kind of able to achieve more of the painterly style that I usually like to work with, and I think that fits a lot better for the clothing. And then for Masaki's ice cream, I kept things pretty simple. I decided to give him a steel bowl, just because I wanted to kind of render something a little bit shinier. And then for the ice cream and the kind of like little berries or whatever, I kept everything pretty simple just because I didn't want to put too much texture here and there. But overall, I prefer using the simple mode a lot just because I feel like you free up a lot of space for just drawing in general on the phone, which is already a tiny surface. But for the most part, I think having access both to the studio mode and simple mode are just both good. Studio mode, I think it's good for maybe having more customization and adjustments, but for simple mode, if you're just sketching on the go, I think you can definitely use the simple mode a lot more easier. Also, you have access to your time lapses automatically when you start up your canvas. You can go ahead and go into the canvas settings and turn that off if you don't want it. So Masaki is basically done here, and I wanted to mention this earlier. If you turn your phone on its side like this in simple mode, I don't really like how the bar is so large like this, so I highly recommend if you want more space, just leave it in vertical mode. It's just much more easier. So hopefully you guys enjoyed watching me draw on my phone today, and I'll talk to you guys next time. Bye!